Doodle doo 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 doo. Secrets of Sea of Secrets. Greetings, I'm Demonac, and this is the SOS version of TDDC's Extras videos. If you're new to the channel, welcome! These side videos will accompany each episode of Sea of Secrets with more information about the world, the production, and where I answer questions from my patrons, who get these about a week early. You'll also probably hear the initials TDDC a lot in Secrets videos and in the comments. That's my original YouTube series, Tales from My D&D Campaign, aka Tales from Demonac's Deathfin Campaign, if Watsy is asking. So if you're itching for more of this kind of storytelling, there are 66 episodes waiting for you, about 24 hours of watch time, though they don't look as nice, especially towards the beginning. For SOS Episode 1, let's start with some of the top questions rapid fire. What RPG system are you playing? D&D 3.5. Originally I planned to avoid this question by making it clear in the first episode, in the video, on the title card, etc. But planning and scripting of the episode happened right in the midst of the 2022-2023 WotC OGL crisis. So, for protection against future stupidity, I chose to remove all mentions of Dungeons & Dragons and Wizards product identity terms from the videos themselves, since there's really no way to edit that on YouTube. The game takes place in my custom setting, which I call Deathfin. That's a setting name, akin to Dark Sun, not a world name like Dark Sun's world of Athos. And because I'm a tool, I never named the world itself. Though, in my defense, there is only one world in Deathfin. A world with 3 geographically similar versions, the Shadowfell, the Feywild, and the comparatively normal plane referred to as the Fadelands. And with effectively no other planar travel, their world is just the world. There's no other world to confuse it with. Just the darker version and the weirder version of that world. When did this campaign take place? Is it still ongoing? This campaign was actually played in 2015 and 2016 after my previous TDDC campaign went on hiatus. I was spending so much creative energy on my full-time programming job at that time that I was getting burnt out. But I blamed it on the difficulty of planning for high-level D&D, and my solution was to restart a new campaign. Same world, same players, but with new low-level characters. That's why, unsurprisingly, this one also went on hiatus in 2016, but, oh man, so much crazy stuff happened in this campaign. Who were the characters and the players? The same core players from the end of TDDC are back, with all new level 3 characters. The Dungeon Master's Guide has a listing for how much wealth a character of that level ought to have, so most of them start with one or more minor magic items, including some of the very cheap, very minor items in the Magic Item Compendium. They were also allowed to take up to 1 flaw, that's preset penalties, in exchange for getting an extra feat. Uhamisho starts as a level 2 totemist from Magic of Incarnum with 1 barbarian level. His race is Shifter, who are people with some lycanthrope blood, like half werewolf or whatever, though in the case of Misho's tribe, it's more their attunement to animal spirits. He's played by Quill18, the same player as Draven from TDDC. He is a Twitch streamer and also a much bigger YouTuber than I am, with tons of Let's Plays, especially 4X games, city builders, and other strategy games. If you're unfamiliar with Incarnum, it's an alternate magic system from a fairly self-contained third-party book. Totemists and other classes from that book shape self-buffs called soul melds at the start of the day, which correspond to the same body slots as magic items in 3rd ed D&D, torso, head, feet, etc. Each soul meld can give them a variety of skill bonuses and special abilities, though they usually have to focus on 1 or 2 main ones each day. Fun fact, his name is a Kenyan word, which more or less means exile. Blue is a level 3 scion from the expanded Psionics handbook. His primary discipline is telepathy, which is why he can charm people, though he also learns a lot of attack powers. If you're unfamiliar with 3rd edition Psionics, instead of having spell slots of specific spell levels, Psionic characters have a daily allotment of power points. A level 1 power costs 1 point to cast. It's 3 points to cast a level 2 power, 5 for a level 3, etc. But many lower level powers can be augmented, upcast, by spending extra points. Each psionic power is often more flexible than a single wizard or cleric spell, for example, an element-based power letting you choose the damage type at the time of casting. But psions know fewer of them, and they are often less efficient because aspects like damage might not scale with caster level unless you augment them with additional points. Now, blue is a goblin of sorts, and some of you may know there's a traditional breed of psionic goblin referred to as blues. But that's not exactly what this character is. His origin's a little more mysterious. Also, he was actually supposed to be just under 3 feet tall, but somehow in the design process I ended up making him only 2 feet tall, which was partly an error, but also partly because making him and halflings that small is kind of cute, and I like the degree of size diversity it creates. He's played by Paul, the same player as Little One in TDDC, so while he doesn't have any social media worth linking to, if you watch my original series, you'll get to know his gaming style pretty well. Fun fact, Paul was trying to decide between gray and blue skin, so naturally I told him about the old mutant blue goblins. And he was like, "Blue it is!" Also, blue is supposed to carry a club just to look less obviously defenseless. Look armed so you aren't forced to defend yourself so often. But I couldn't be bothered since I don't think it ever came up. Adria is a level 3 Beguiler from Player's Handbook 2. That's an intelligence-based, spontaneous caster. Her spell list is small, but all those spells are available to her at all times, plus every few levels she can learn an illusion or enchantment spell of her choice from other spell lists. Her race is called Eladrin in my world, which is probably very confusing to some people because they have nothing to do with various other D&D races called Eladrin, like those Four Seasons people. Rather, in my world, Eladrin is just the name used by the elfkin who live in the Feywild, a brighter, weirder, more magical plane whose geography is almost identical to the Fadelands, the world where we started. In more traditional D&D terms, my Eladrin are the High Elves, 5.5 foot tall, slim elves with a bonus to intelligence, as opposed to elves, in my world, who the rulebooks would call wood elves, statuesque 7 foot tall elves with a bonus to strength. Both versions in this world are ageless, clinically immortal. The Elven King and Queen, as well as the Queen and Prince of the Eladrin, have all ruled basically since mortals first appeared in the world. The collective term for all elfkin, the elves Eladrin and the much maligned drow of the Underdark, is the Eldar, or Eldar peoples. Adria was created by the same player as Angel from TDDC. I don't give his name because we kind of lost contact with him in the years since. I think he's gone off the grid. So I never got his explicit permission to identify him, and obviously no social media links. Though, if you watch Tales from My D&D campaign, disappearing is the most Angel thing that guy could have done, really. Fun fact, Adria is 200 years old. She also has shift-weave clothes similar to Jinx, but that won't come up nearly as much because her disguise self spell can make her clothes look however she wants, though that costs her a spell slot, unlike a changeling's shapeshifting. Pelor is a level 3 human fighter with an improved trip build, making him better at tripping and giving him a free attack whenever he successfully trips an enemy, which makes a big difference since regular trip attacks don't deal damage. Though theoretically the most basic of classes, he is working towards the prerequisites for the Dervish Prestige class, which will make him a very mobile, though lightly armored, attacker. Pelor is played by Briarstone, and is probably a lot closer to his normal style than his character Black in TDDC. If you watched the old 1990s Gargoyles cartoon, imagine Puck and his alter ego, who I won't name due to 30-year-old spoilers. Unfortunately, after the events of Sea of Secrets, there was a rather sudden and unrelated falling out between him and most of the group. So, as with Angel's player, Briarstone wouldn't be involved if and when I managed to bring either campaign back from hiatus. Fun fact, Pelor, the character, is named after Pelor, the standard 3rd edition god of healing and the sun. But that god is actually dead in my world. So, having the name Pelor is a bit like a person IRL walking around with the name Zeus, or Tiamat, though D&D borrowed the name of the Babylonian god Tiamat for another fictional deity who is, coincidentally, also dead in my setting. Jinx is a level 2 bard, level 1 spell thief. That's a variant rogue who can trade some of her sneak attack damage to borrow spells from her targets. And obviously she's a changeling, a humanoid with no real stat bonuses or racial abilities, except she can shapeshift her appearance at will, similar to a disguised self spell, but a real physical change. It's supposed to be medium-sized humanoids only, so dwarves and 8-foot orcs yes, but halflings and goblins no, but we kind of ignored that and let her become small species too, because it's cooler. Jinx is played by Launchpad, who joined the TDDC campaign in the later episodes as Krillodin. By Sea of Secrets he was more comfortable with our group and style, and this time he's not being dropped into a mature campaign in the middle of nowhere, so his character should have a much better chance to shine this time. Fun fact, Jinx's shapeshifting only changes her body, not her clothing, which adds a minor complication to her usual tricks. To compensate, she uses a magic item called Shiftweave Clothing, which can change into one of 5 predetermined outfits as a swift action. Of course, I still had to figure out how to show her antics in the videos. From the start, I worked with the portrait and concept artist, Archie Doodler, to give Jinx huge, unmistakable, unique eyes, which I could use as visual language to the audience. Obviously, whatever form she takes, Jinx has normal-looking eyes in-universe. They're only giant purple and green eyes on screen, so that we can follow her between different body shapes. The problem is, theoretically, whenever Jinx copies somebody else, she would be choosing one of her 5 preset outfits. For example, if mimicking Jagad, she would probably pick her noble/wealthy male ensemble, which would probably be good enough to fool anybody who knew him, but hadn't seen him the same day to know what he was actually wearing. In fact, that first rooftop scene you can see this, as she keeps her loose poncho-style sweater when transforming into Boulder. But even in that scene, I already gave up. To do it properly, I should have drawn her with Boulder's massive fists, but without his gloves, and when she changed into Jagad, I should have done a whole new sprite with her shiftweave suit instead of his usual cream-colored one. That's a bunch of extra work. Plus, at that point in time, Jagad was a character you had only seen for about 30 seconds, so it was both easier and communicated more clearly to the audience to put Jinx's eyes on an otherwise unchanged version of the character she is copying. And that's how I plan to do it going forward. If Jinx is making up a character, like her halfling beggar routine, I'll draw her in her own clothes. But anytime she is copying a specific person that she has seen, like the woman from the portrait in this episode, I'm going to just show Jinx's purple eyes on that character's regular model. When does Sea of Secrets take place, relative to the events of the original Tales from My D&D campaign? For fans of the first series, which takes place in the same world, SOS Episode 1 happens around the time the TDDC party are bumbling around the Uruk Desert, far north, and months after that party swung through Bankton. That mech has glowing yellow eyes! Is Mallet actually Beta from TDDC? No. Here's the thing. That eye color was just an artistic choice, which is unfortunate because I knew it would be kind of misleading to fans of my first series, where those eyes on a golem or warforged meant something very specific. But there are only so many, broadly described, colors for glowing eyes. I liked how the yellow looked on the blue metal, and as a bonus, it let me do that sweet transition into my logo. Fun fact? Mallet was always an oversized mech with one giant fist, but when designing his look for the series, this was the inspiration for his face. Have you thought about hiring real voice actors? No. I put a lot of work into the main party voices for the new series, finding each of their characters, but also trying to make all 5 different enough to be recognizable without the visuals, It was like one of those logic puzzle grid things. I mean, Misho's voice is just my version of Odo from DS9, though our hero gets a lot more bestial. But the key to that voice is incorporating a low growl, and yet I needed Blue to sound different enough despite my aim being an angrier, growlier version of Little One, since L's voice is so good at capturing the energy of that player, though that is very different from actually sounding like his real voice. Then, I needed not one but two voices which were passably feminine and different enough from each other, and I wanted Adria and recurring NPC Jagad to have appropriate accents, but they are not accents I have a lot of in-person exposure to, and because of the history of racist impressions of people from certain parts of the world, I had to make these accents fairly subtle-ish and realistic-ish to keep them respectful, as opposed to the gleefully terrible pseudo-German and Russian accents I've given to the Wood Elves and the Drow. And there's also Pelor. Main issue there is differentiating his overconfident, bombastic voice from that of Daggerface, in case I manage to get DF's miniseries going again. Now, I don't usually do these extra videos entirely in Q&A format, except a bit at the end where I answer questions from my Patreon patrons. So I'm just going to run through what else was left out of the episode, either for time, narrative flow, or for other reasons. First off, the Beggar scene, where Jinx and Pelor interact with "the end is nigh" guy. If you haven't seen it, I animated that bonus scene as a separate video, so click the link somewhere around here. If it hadn't interrupted the flow of the story too much for my fast-moving first episode, I would have given that guy achievement Bill Nye the Magic Guy. Loot! It's D&D, so there was, in fact, loot. One of the elite thugs had a +1 short sword, which Jinx ended up with. The mithril mech had a masterwork rapier. The priest, the old man, had a scroll of cure moderate wounds, a silver holy symbol, and his white long coat was a minor magic item. It wasn't all that powerful, but at the same time, it was definitely useful to anybody who didn't have a cloak slot item already. For example, Uhamisho's tiger pelt is a +1 cloak of resistance. Twice per day, as an immediate action, the jacket would give +2 to your next saving throw. They were thinking of giving it to Pelor, but he was like, "Wait, it's a long coat?" And we're like, "Yeah, it's magic, so it'll resize for you, but if you want, you can find somebody to dye it." But he's like, "I have this whole puffy shirt, hammer pants, swashbuckling vibe. If I wear a long coat, suddenly I'm just trench coat guy." Some of us thought puffy pants, long coat, pirate guy was a cool vibe, but as you might expect if you know Black from TDDC, he was not sold. Then he remembered that he already had an El Cheapo magic cloak, the Piercer cloak from Magic Item Compendium, so Adria ended up taking the magic coat, which I jokingly nicknamed the Full Mental Jacket. The other main loot they found was a rocket fist. Yeah, Mallet's giant fist, rocket fist, it was supposed to have steam pouring out the back whenever he smashed through a wall, but I liked how the animation looked without it and decided that was one spot where I could definitely save myself some time and effort. Now, the specifically Mallet-based portion of that fight scene, that was not one of the parts that was edited, cut down, or fast-forwarded. Mallet died to fully transformed bard-buffed Misho's overwhelming fury on the totemist's first round. Mallet smashed through the wall and punched him. Pelor got in a solid hit with improved trip. Then Misho raged, shifted, and shredded what was left of Mallet's 40 max hit points, which I thought would have been pretty tough against a level 3 party when backed up by 2 other 20 hit point mechs and a couple weak minions halfway through the fight. But anyway, Mallet died so fast that he never got to use his rocket fist move, which was kind of a gecko tail-like escape option. He would have fired the fist as a bonus action, which, against an adjacent target, had 10-foot knockback with no save, plus a saving throw against a little bit of damage or being knocked down as well. Since he died so fast, I just cheated and let him use it as an "I'm dying, whatever" action, sliding Misho back a bit, though he saved. Didn't affect the fight in any significant way, but it was fun. Thing is, once detached from the mech, The rocket fist was effectively a magic item which could be used. It's just that in order to recharge it, you have to use a spell that deals at least 1 fire damage, which I knew whether or not Jinx or Adria could dig up a fire spell on their lists. Blue could probably do that with almost any psionic power with energy in the name, just spending a few power points, for example, before resting someday when he hadn't spent them all. But the party didn't seem interested in recharging this thing and carrying it around, so I left it out of the video as a detail that would have required a whole bunch of seconds of explanation for no real benefit. Phil the Thug. When they first entered the Warrens of Tamboro, first point of interest was a pair of dead halflings near a dead thug. Well, Jinx, being a changeling, arranged her adventurer outfit as much like the thug's leather armor as she could, and arranged her face to look as much like the thug's face as she could. And, you know, his body, height and weight, etc., minus the lethal wounds, of course. Then, in the next room, they heard somebody moving around. The party got ready, kick open a door, and they see a thuggy-looking dude who looks like he heard them just before they breached and just dropped his looting sack. So Misho starts moving, and then has to stop himself mid-charge as Blue shouts, "Charm!" And this single thug room was already neutralized. Blue, and others prompting Blue, asked some questions, learning that there were a whole bunch of thugs who had been hired weeks or even months earlier, paid on retainer, and yet not given any jobs prior to today. They had simply been told, "We'll pay you this much a week," not a large amount, but in those weeks they didn't really have to do anything. In exchange, when the employers did call on them, there would be no notice and they had to come. When that word came, it was meet at X location, and when they met there, they got organized to invade and take over the Tamboro Warren. Once it was secured, with all inhabitants kicked out, all they had to do was guard it until they heard otherwise. So, of course, this guy started looting, because thug's gonna thug, am I right? But then, Jinx asked him, "Hey, what's my name?" in like a bad Brooklyn or something accent. It took a couple tries, but she tricked him into revealing that the name of the guy she was impersonating was Phil, which she figured would be helpful in later shenanigans. Then Jinx was like, "Okay, that's all I needed." So Uhamisho just slashed the guy down. Jinx had fun RPing as Phil the Thug, and that arguably helped them get the drop on one group, slightly, but what humor we got out of it was inconveniently spread throughout the dungeon. Like, to keep any of it, I would have had to keep all of it, including the setup scenes, and that would have cost too much time. Going back in. I obviously streamlined their exploration of the Warrens in numerous ways, but the biggest one was, they actually left the dungeon. After the mechs and the big fight in the old man/Jagad room, they found the back exit of the community. All these halfling warrens have a back door, if not two, an exit known to all members of the suburb, but hidden from the outside, so that if they're stuck defending the maze-like hamlet, they aren't just trapped to be smoked out or whatever. Following where the gnome had run off, the party did not encounter the other experimental subjects, but rather exited out the back stairs, which would have been hidden under a different tree than the front entrance, but whose entrance had been exposed by the one-eyed mastermind's escape. That's when they had the conversation with the female marshal about the horses and ponies. Their riders had given up on the chase, but had switched to investigating, looking for witnesses of where the gnome had run off to. And that's basically when we called it a night for the first session. But when we started the next week, we noted they hadn't rescued all the halflings who were still unaccounted for, so they actually went back down and explored the other half of the labyrinth they had missed. And they found the armory, where about a dozen halflings, including some children, had barricaded themselves, armed with a handful of swords and wooden shields, and a whole bunch of slings. The PCs took out a handful of thugs who were keeping those villagers pinned, and escorted them back to the exit, which is why the civilians at the end were very convinced our PCs were heroes worthy of pie. After that, they swept around the rest of the way, finding another halfling corpse, but then rescuing one hiding in a latrine, who warned them about the next room's enemies and told them about the back exit, which they might not have known had they gone a different way the first time. Here, they found an alternate way into the same big room where Jagad had been tied up, but coming from this direction, instead of mechs, it was guarded by the experiments. That room went more or less as shown in the video, Blue taking the lead because of his charm, but also he was less hurt than some of the frontliners, and though his armor class is garbage, he has a lot more hit points than Adria or Jinx. Since they had been warned about this room though, Adria cast Silent Image first, making an illusion of herself to try and trick some enemies into wasting attacks. So when the loudmouth thug in the other room convinced the other non-charmed freaks into attacking with their powers, Adria cast Unseen Servant, an invisible summon who can do basic tasks but nothing combat related. And she combined that with her illusion to make it look like she was opening the door, which did trick the thugs back there into wasting a round worth of attacks while the others dealt with the experiments. Which was pretty cool, and it would have been beneficial to show Adria's sneaky magic more. There's another thing it didn't quite make sense without the warning from finding a halfling. I found the script was smoother if I just inserted the freaks room as though it were physically between Jagad's room and the back exit. My awesome Patreon patrons get secrets videos about a week early so that I can answer some of their questions in this final video on YouTube, where I read the questions out in random, sometimes ridiculous voices, like this. And Terry's Maelstrom asked, how did Mallet even get into the house to burst out of in the intro, without even being seen by that gate guard? That question was skipped over in the video's hyper pace, but the evidence gathered by the party suggested that the goons, and Mallet, had been hiding out in that house for days, maybe more than a week, during which time they had cut through a section of roof from the attic, allowing them to escape after the crime. And that's how the party found their rooftop trail. Mallet can fit through normal doors. Like moving a fridge, it's a pain, but it works. So they could have snuck the mech in on a previous night. Jagad is now pretty sure that the lead he was following on some rare documents in that alley must have been a setup. It has been speculated that the kidnappers chose that location for the fake meeting because they had found out somehow that the owners would be out of town for a period. Also, if you're wondering, why did guards notice the crime scene immediately after the PCs, but not in the hour beforehand? Well, after attacking Jagad, the bad guys had actually thrown up a hasty fence they had prepared in the house. Not much better than a couple wooden cargo pallets, but it was enough that people just walking past after the kidnapping didn't notice the hole in the wall. When the giant dwarf sightings dried up and the party started looking around, the shabby barricade was obviously out of place though, so the big guys on the team ripped off enough boards to get through, and it's that damage to the makeshift fence which drew the attention of the next guard patrol. Fun fact, when Misho says, "There's a hole in that wall," that was his reaction to rolling a natural 1 on his search check after bypassing the fence. He was pointing out the thing so massive that you couldn't possibly miss it. Unfortunately, the fast pace of this episode and the actual dramatic reveal of that scene made it too awkward to work in the Nat 1 graphic, let alone mention it. The clue that he missed with the search check was that the pattern of debris showed how the wall had been smashed from the inside out, not outside in. Gashrin asked, I know you are avoiding the term D&D and other WotC words in the video after the OGL scare, but why is D&D still in the thumbnail image and the text name of the video? You're right about WotC's OGL copyright scare, but it's actually even more complicated. D&D story is, I believe, the thing most likely to get people who would enjoy my stuff to click on it. And D&D, D&D story, Dungeons & Dragons, etc. in the tags is how YouTube's algorithm figures out that somebody who likes Critical Role or Fool's Gold is a good person to suggest TDDC or SOS to. And right now, all that stuff is fine. WotC walked back from the brink, and even at their worst, they claimed that stuff like this wouldn't be affected due to their fan video policy. I'm not competing with their rule books, after all. The problem is that though things are safe now, and probably will be for a year or 3 years, I no longer have the certainty that it will always continue to be safe. So what I'm worried about is that a day might come when WotC does some asshole thing and suddenly I get a cease and desist letter, or, more likely, the YouTube robots start hunting down and blocking or claiming D&D stuff in generally stupid ways with no human interaction and ignoring fair use and other legal defenses. If or when that happens, I would need to get rid of all mentions of D&D, including from the video, because those YouTube bots absolutely scan the audio now, and in the future, as AI improves, they may even go after text in the video, although they don't do that currently. So when WotC Skynet comes down, I want to be able to strip out all traces of D&D words from Sea of Secrets, obviously impossible for TDDC. And I totally can, because I can change the thumbnail, the video image that people see to click on, and I can change all the text around the video. All that stuff is editable whenever I want, but what I can't edit in any realistic way is the video itself, including the audio, like saying, "Tales from my D&D campaign." So that's why I'm preemptively stripping all the future risk sort of D&D words from inside the video, while still plastering them everywhere all over the outside of the video. And yeah, if they start blocking this kind of video, I'll live. Just leave my episodes alone.
Gabe JD asked, "Did any of the PCs know each other prior to being hired on with Jagad?"
As Jagad gathered the party together, they've had between a week and several months to get to know each other, depending on when they each signed on to the expedition. But no, these guys didn't have any connection before being hired. 3C273 asked, "If they are only level 3, how does Uhamisho have plus 24 to jump? Is it some crazy totemist thing or combo?" I don't have a full breakdown that I can find, but here's a quick attempt to reconstruct it. As a level 3 character, Misho has the skill maxed out at 6 ranks, plus 4 from 18 strength, plus 4 from movement speed. Barbarian 1 gives plus 10 speed, and you get plus 4 on running jumps for every 10 speed above the average. Plus 4 from his Land Shark Boots soul meld. That part is totemist. And because we're still using the old house rules I set out for the first campaign, acrobatics, jump, tumbling is all one skill. So I was probably letting them add the plus 2 synergy bonus for 5 ranks of tumble. In hindsight, I should have removed those synergy bonuses, but it's not a big deal. So that's plus 20 right there. If one of his other 2 soul melds, or some cheapo starting magic item, give him plus 5 jump, or another plus 10 speed, which equals plus 4 jump, we'd basically be there. He'd actually have another plus 2 from raging and plus 1 from shifting when you factor in those temporary strength bonuses, but he wouldn't have been counting those at the time he made that statement. Mr. Nobody 13 asked,
"Oi, what's the deal with them experiments? I mean, what makes them different than just bad wizards?"
In 3.5 edition, basically every special ability is rigidly classified. For example, the rogue's evasion is an extraordinary ability, meaning that however amazing it is, there's no magic involved at all. It would absolutely work in an anti-magic field. When a wizard or sorcerer casts a spell, there are clear rules for that. For example, there's almost always a verbal and or somatic, waving your hands around, and or material component, focusing via magic wand or sacrificing a pinch of diamond dust, etc. Psionic powers have their own similar rules, though in our rule set they're considered mostly identical to magic because it avoids some annoying issues. But there are also supernatural abilities, and then what these so-called experiments were doing, which are spell-like abilities. That means their effect works a lot like a specific spell, but has a bit different rules for casting, and they don't have spell slots like wizards, clerics, etc. They can cast this spell-like ability almost instinctively a certain number of times per day, maybe unlimited times. When the party noticed this using their spellcraft and arcana skills, and later talked with a couple of survivors, it became apparent that these people didn't learn magic through training, not even with a head start from a gift or inheritance like sorcerers. Rather, they seem to have been given their imperfect, somewhat defective powers via some kind of experimental magical or magitech process. But while most of them weren't quite as out of it as number 58, the scarred man who Blue had charmed, none of them seemed to know much about life outside the lab, raising questions of whether they had been raised there from childhood, or whether their minds had been impacted in other ways. It also sounded troublingly familiar to Blue. Fun fact, number 58, his power was just plus 10 hit points. I mean, as a 1 hit point minion, that's a lot more hit points, but it ain't much of a power, especially when Misho's one-shotting the better thugs, who also happen to have 11 hit points. Rex asked,
Wait, I thought all the warforged in your world were made by the Atarans from that blue metal like Mallet. Does it mean something that the other two were made of other materials? Mithril and some kind of wood?
Warforged, called soul-forged mechs or mechanicals in WotC risk reduction land, were almost all made of Etronium, the strange blue metal produced by an ancient Itaran creation matrix. But in many of those mechs, it took the form of Etronium alloys. For example, Daggerface claims to be made of mithril, but his body is mostly a mithril-Etronium alloy, and it's the same for this mithril mech, or for almost any mech with an adamantine body. In game mechanics, those are Warforged-specific feats which must be taken at first level, and which define the armor type that is built into them. And it makes sense that even the adamantine Warforged are actually an alloy, because the Soul Forges were a form of specialized creation matrix, again, converting waste material into the blue metal. But being an alloy also provides the in-universe reason why killing an adamantine body Warforged doesn't make you rich. If a significant percentage of a humanoid's mass were adamantine or mithril, you could just melt down their corpse into thousands upon thousands of gold worth of the rare metal. But in our mechs, only a fraction of that mass is the valuable stuff, and even that is mixed in with Etronium, this bizarre ancient metal that modern smiths and alchemists haven't yet found an efficient way to extricate. As for the mech with the ironwood body, that one's pretty weird. It's also a somewhat rare material, and hard for non-druids to work, but the result is a wood that is as strong as metal. Not your typical Itaran style, by any means, but without any evidence to the contrary, it's still more plausible that Jaws here was some weird ancient Itaran experimental build, rather than a new Soulcraft mech, formerly known as Warforged, made without one of the ancient Soul Forges. Grim Reaper asked, How do psionic powers fit into the magical landscape of your setting? I treat psionics as another source of magic, which seems to require either some kind of heredity or interaction with something odd, like those Adar crystals around the Lauric countryside. The bigger thing I had to incorporate due to this new party was Uhamisho's Incarnum stuff. I think Incarnum, as described in that book, takes a little work to fit together with other forms of magic, from a world-building point of view. I don't remember how much of this is verbatim versus how I've adapted it in my head, but part of the Incarnum is like a layer of the universe which records and retains information, like thoughts and feelings, skills and instincts. Incarnum users are calling upon this energy, not on the souls of past heroes, or in a totemist's case, animal and monster spirits, but rather the impression their thoughts and deeds left on the universe. In a sense, the cleric spell Speak with Dead makes more sense as interacting with Incarnum than it does if you think in terms of afterlives, because the spell works on the corpse, not so much the soul, when the soul has gone off to wherever. The idea that you could connect with the knowledge of that creature, but even without the soul, the personality is still entangled enough with that information that it would resist giving answers the creature would not want answered had it been alive? That feels like Incarnum to me. Of course, Misho's interacting more with the predatory energy and instincts imprinted by generations of magical beasts. Here's a big mixed metaphor. Wizards and sorcerers, and many other casters, manipulate energy externally, finding words, motions, and patterns, methods to move that energy around. Psionic casters make themselves a local concentration of magic. They are the magic wand, so they manipulate it inside their own mind and body, even if the output is external. Tai users, martial artists, and Tome of Battle classes are almost a mix between psionic and arcane casters, using both external motions and internal manipulation of energy. You could think of a warblade or monk as a very fit wizard who casts using their whole body, especially concerned with flow and timing. Divine casters and warlocks are given access codes by their deity, so they manipulate energy almost like running a program on the cloud. Of course, they still have to do some of the processing locally and direct the output. A lot of the work for them tends to be behavioral, acting or living in a particular way all the time to remain worthy of that access. Fae, and most of those warlock patrons, are using little glitches and exploits to access the dark web or to hotwire local concentrations of magic, making and taking payments in karma, with everything recorded on the karma blockchain. Totemists are digging through the CDs, the Internet Archive, and old disconnected hard drives for forgotten code that still works, or to whip out ancient memes. Martin Svala asked,
Bayin, the mysterious woman the group met at the start, can you tell us anything about her?
Though I'm notoriously stingy with information that will come up later, or which might not, but I don't want to spoil it anyway because I dream of a later reveal, in this particular case, I think I can give you the quick version since she was almost more of a cameo from a future story than a character important to this one. Bayin was born conjoined with her twin sister, Dayin. Their mother died giving birth, and the girls, who were attached at the shoulder, whose vascular systems were intertwined, and whose developmental issues also left them without hands on the arms they did have, were not expected to survive, which is probably why their names basically just mean left and right. However, Director Veluma of the Psionic Academy used her powers and her astoundingly fine control to successfully separate the two infants and took them in as wards of the Academy. Bayin had considerable natural gifts, and has risen to become one of the Academy's top problem solvers in the Bangton area, using her telekinetic powers to get around most of the issues caused by her physical disabilities. Unfortunately, her sister Dayin did not get any of that psionic talent, so though the Academy still raised and educated her, she's struggled both physically, as a person with no hands, and in finding purpose in the shadow of her powerful sister, and generally surrounded by people who have both hands and psionics. Dayin is actually surprisingly physically capable. It's D&D, so she's a freaking monk, despite being like a 98-pound woman, minus the weight of 1.5 arms. But she has to feed and dress herself every day without fingers, while her sister's clothes just float around her and tie themselves up like she's some kind of Disney princess whose woodland friends and birds happen to be invisible. I like that Bayin surprised them with good humor despite their crass no-hands puns. But it's a little sadder when you realize it's because she has grown up with that shit endlessly her whole life, to the point that she doesn't consciously realize how gross it is. Unless you're talking about her sister's disability. That would make her mad. 9 asked, is the plan to keep episodes this fastly paced? Very no. After the first episode, which aims to get people hooked, we're going back to regular TDDC pace, whatever that is. And for all I know, it might be perceived as even a little slower as we have more in-character discussions and RP, taking some time to get to know the characters. Anyway, If you found my channel through Sea of Secrets, there's a ton more stories here. In my previous campaign series, Tales from my D&D campaign, my animated Legends videos, and the emotional, audio-only Saga of Balvan. For shorter funny videos, there's my Mini Tales playlist, plus select bits of live table audio in precious moments. Sea of Secrets Episode 2 is coming, funded, as always, by my patrons at patreon.com/demonac. They're the ones who allowed me to make this my full-time job a few years ago. Do patrons get a ton of amazing benefits? Not really. You can download MP3s of most of the music of TDDC and SOS. You get episodes of an audio-only D&D 5e podcast called Hammer and Smoke as each episode is completed, while I very slowly try to build the whole season to release publicly. For $4+ a month, Lore Master patrons get more maps and extra short fiction that I write from time to time. And as much as I love Epic patrons and the organization for pledging even more, Lore Master patrons get access to all my stuff, while the vast majority of my content is always free. Meaning, those who can afford to throw me a few bucks a month are mostly doing so just to support me, which I appreciate so much. Speaking of which, I activated Super Thanks on YouTube, which is a real awkward name, but what that button does is for a one-time donation, you can make a special highlighted comment, and I get 70% of that cash. At the time of posting this, none of my videos have Super Thanks comments, so I imagine they would really stand out. But if you just want to help me out, Patreon is the best way, because it's a regular monthly income I can plan around, and I keep about 90% of any money that comes in there. Money which has also enabled me to turn around and support other creators by commissioning art from Archie Doodler and S. Mitchell Maps, music from Coolboy Shane, and that sweet, sweet Pelor dance animation by Rags Animations to help make this series bigger and better than I could on my own, instead of struggling to be a truly one-man show. Only mostly one man, plus some voices and community moderation from my sister, Adria. There's so much more cool music, and I have big plans to get way more personal with these characters and their story arcs than TDDC ever did, while continuing to deliver the silliness, world building, interesting combats, and infinite unresolved plot hooks that you've all come to expect from me. And by the way, if you can't afford to join my Patreon, or just don't feel like it, it doesn't cost you anything to like my videos and to share the ones you like with anybody you think would enjoy them, because the algorithm, TM, sure isn't helping spread Sea of Secrets. YouTube doesn't even like series where the videos need to be watched in order, and it doesn't look like I'm gonna go viral, so the only way for me to grow is word of mouth, which is you. But even if all you do is watch, that counts too. So thank you for watching this whole ass Secrets video and listening to that giant sales pitch. And of course, a special thanks to these generous souls whose extra large Patreon pledges earned their custom avatars a place in the episode credits. Administrator Orange, Aether Mordu, Alberio, Oust, Aurelius, Bedamir, Bessie, Captain Rook, Brethren, no, that's definitely not alphabetical. Anyway, Karnlin, Critical Hit 20, Darkwood, Dimmin, Dragon Loot, Draugr, Earl of Sanguine, Ekardir Thalion, Fey Crossroads, Fireborn, Gator Island, I think I went there once, Fright Knight, Gorefiend, General M.O., 9, Hakun. Shouldn't Hakun be before 9 because it's an I, or does 9 go like at the start or end because it's a number? Lieutenant Red, Lonito, Lord Abon, Malison Desh, Matt the Mage, Mars Project, MG3D, Norgren, OI1, Olden Man, Overlord Thor, Pedrig of Rooney, Pontus, Quackers, Ramar Wolfist, Repmok, Rex, Rewoot, Skyter97, Stan the Man, Starfall, Sygax, Tambu and June, that one has 2 of them, Toshiro 7, Volkfang, Valis, W.A. Soul, Warsaw, Woodley, and Zombie, the members of the organization.